The shy janitor was asked to sing for fun, but her voice made the CEO lose control. Before we start, leave a comment and tell us which city you're watching from. And don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10 at the end. Enjoy the story.
The silence of Blackwood Industries headquarters after 8 p.m. was a sound all its own, a deep, humming void that seems to absorb all traces of the chaotic day. It was a silence made of recycled air, the distant whir of servers in the basement, and the gentle, rhythmic squeak of Clara's own cartwheels. At 28, Clara had become a master of this void, a ghost in the machine of corporate America. Her gray uniform was a shade of urban camouflage, designed to blend into the polished concrete floors and steel gray walls. She was a necessary function, like plumbing or electricity, and just as invisible. Earlier that day, she had witnessed this invisibility in its purest form. A junior executive, a young man named Mr. Davies, with a perpetually panicked look in his eyes, had rushed out of his cubicle, tripped, and sent a large cup of coffee flying. The dark liquid had splashed across the pristine white floor in a Jackson Pollock of corporate anxiety. He let out a string of curses, frantically dabbing at the mess with flimsy napkins, only making it worse. Clara, who had been cleaning a nearby office, had approached without a word. She'd deftly taken over, her practiced hands using the absorbent powder and microfiber mop to make the stain vanish in under a minute. Mr. Davies had stared, not at her, but at the floor where the stain had been. "Oh, thanks," he'd muttered, already turning away, his mind back on the presentation he was late for. He never made eye contact. He never asked her name. To him, she hadn't been a person who helped. She had been a problem that solved itself. This was her life, an existence lived in the margins of other people's dramas. Her world outside these silent halls was just as quiet. A one-bedroom apartment the size of a boardroom table, filled with second-hand furniture and the lingering scent of the lemon-scented cleaner she used at work. Her struggle was a quiet, suffocating one, the mountain of medical debt her mother had left behind. Each paycheck was a frantic exercise in triage. Rent, utilities, a small, desperate payment to the collections agency, and whatever pocket change remained for groceries. The calls were the worst. They always came from a blocked number. A cheerful, professionally detached voice would ask for Clara May, and her stomach would clench. "I'm sorry," she'd recite, the words a familiar, shameful script. "I can only pay $50 this week." The cheerful voice would turn cold. "Ma'am, your outstanding balance is over $60,000. $50 is not an acceptable—" She would hang up before they could finish, her heart hammering against her ribs. Tonight, her target was the 40th floor boardroom, a glass-walled cathedral to commerce overlooking the glittering, indifferent expanse of the city. It was the domain of the company's founder and CEO, Alistair Blackwood, a man spoken of in hushed, reverential tones. As she wiped down the colossal oak table, the city lights felt like 1,000 judging eyes. It was in moments like this, when the loneliness was most profound, that her secret would escape. It started as a low hum, a melody that seemed to rise from the very depths of her soul. The memory was sharp and clear. She was 7, a thunderstorm was rattling their little house, and she was hiding under the kitchen table. Her mother, her hand smelling of flour and cinnamon, had knelt down beside her and started singing that same song. An old folk ballad about finding your way home through the dark. The wind may blow, the rain may fall, but listen for the tune, a single note to guide you all, beneath the lonely moon. Believing she was utterly alone in the skyscraper, she allowed the words to follow her hum, her voice a soft, velvety river of sound that filled the sterile room with an impossible warmth. The acoustics of the glass room turned her whisper into something ethereal, something beautiful and heartbreakingly sad. She closed her eyes, lost for a moment, letting the music be the only thing that was truly hers, a shield against the debt, the loneliness, the invisibility. She didn't see the flicker of the security camera's red light, a silent, digital witness to her private concert. Nor did she notice the glossy flyer left on a side table, its bold letters announcing the mandatory annual Blackwood Holiday Gala, a night that was about to shatter her carefully constructed world. The week leading up to the gala was a special kind of torment. The word mandatory on the flyer felt like a sentence, cold and non-negotiable. Clara even summoned the courage to ask her direct supervisor, George, a man with tired eyes and a permanently weary slump to his shoulders, if there was any way she could be excused. Family matters, she lied, her voice barely a whisper. George had just sighed, the sound of a man who'd given up fighting long ago. Orders from the 40th floor, Clara. It's about company morale and fostering a sense of team. Everyone's got to show their face for at least an hour. Just keep your head down, grab a canapé, and nobody will even know you're there. He meant it to be reassuring, but all it did was reinforce the terms of her existence. Be present, but remain unseen.
The most agonizing part was the dress code, festive cocktail attire. Her closet consisted of 3 pairs of worn-out jeans, a handful of faded t-shirts, and her gray work uniforms. The thrift store on Saturday afternoon was a sensory assault. The smell of mothballs and stale perfume clung to the air. As she sifted through racks of clothes that held the ghosts of other people's lives, she felt a profound sense of trespassing. In the corner, 2 young women, giggling and vibrant, held up a glittery dress. "Oh my God, this is perfect for the party," one squealed. Clara felt a pang of longing, not for the dress, but for the easy joy, the effortless sense of belonging. Her search was one of quiet desperation. This sequin blouse was too loud. This velvet dress was too worn. Finally, she found it. A simple, dark blue sheath dress, the color of the evening sky. It was her armor of invisibility. $7. Her mind immediately did the math. That's a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, and a can of soup. That's 2 days of lunches. With a heavy heart, she paid, the cashier wishing her a cheerful, "Have fun at your party." The words felt like a cruel joke. The night of the gala, the 40th floor boardroom had been transformed into an alien landscape. A massive ice sculpture of the Blackwood Industries logo dripped slowly near a towering champagne fountain. A jazz trio played smoothly in the corner, and servers with trays of sparkling wine and intricate hors d'oeuvres weaved through a crowd dripping with jewels and loud, confident laughter. Clara felt her invisibility shield crack under the sheer pressure of the glamour. When a server offered her a flute, she reflexively shook her head, "No thank you," and found a glass of water, clutching it like a lifeline. She found a small alcove near the service entrance, watching the catering staff, the other ghosts of the evening, move with practiced efficiency. She felt safer here, on the fringe, a guest pretending she was staff. She spotted Alistair Blackwood near the panoramic windows, a fixed point in the swirling galaxy of his employees. He looked even more intimidating out of his office, a titan at ease in his natural habitat. Clara's plan was simple: endure her hour, remain in the shadows, and slip out. But her plan didn't account for Jessica Thorne. Jessica, a marketing manager with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue, spotted Clara from across the room. She'd overheard her earlier talking to her friends. "Can you believe the caterer? He actually tried to correct my French. The nerve!" Jessica saw the world in terms of hierarchies, and Clara was at the very bottom. "Well, well, they really did let everyone in tonight," Jessica said, her voice slicing through the nearby chatter as she and her entourage descended upon Clara's alcove. "I know you. You're the one who always misses that spot behind the ficus in my office, right? Clara, that's it." Clara felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck. "It's Clara." "Right.
Jessica smiled, a condescending, venomous thing. The jazz trio had just finished a set, and a karaoke machine sat idle on the small stage. You know, Clara, we were just saying this party needs some real, raw talent. She gestured toward the stage. It'll be a riot. A little performance from the help. It's what the holidays are all about, right? Charity. The suggestion hung in the air, thick with ridicule. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. Oh no, I couldn't. I don't sing, she stammered, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. Oh, don't be shy, Jessica pressed, her voice getting louder, drawing more attention. Come on, everyone, let's hear it for Clara. She started a slow, mocking clap. Her friends joined in, their laughter like shattering glass. The circle around Clara tightened. She looked for an escape, and her eyes met George's across the room. He saw her distress, her silent plea for help. He simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod toward the stage. Don't make waves. The final betrayal. She was utterly alone. Realizing the only way to make the excruciating moment end was to walk through it, she lowered her head and began the long, terrifying walk toward the stage, the floor feeling like quicksand with every step.
The world of Clara shrank to the small circle of harsh white light. The low stage felt a mile high, the wood hollow beneath her $7 shoes. The band leader, a seasoned musician with a kind but weary face, handed her the microphone with a look of genuine pity. It was cold and heavy in her hand, an alien object. Below her, the sea of faces watched, a silent, waiting jury. The room's chatter had died down into an expectant, predatory silence. Clara could hear the hum of the spotlights, the clink of a single glass being set down, the frantic, panicked drumming of her own heart. Jessica stood in the front row, arms crossed, her smirk a fixed beacon of malice. For one terrifying second, Clara's mind went blank. Run, it screamed. Just drop the mic and run. They'll laugh, but at least it will be over. But then another thought surfaced, a memory of her mother's voice. Doesn't matter who's listening, Clarabelle. You sing for the song, not for the room. She looked at Jessica's smug face, at the circle of her laughing friends, and realized they weren't just waiting for her to fail. They were counting on it. Giving them the satisfaction of her silence suddenly felt like a worse defeat than any ridicule. It was a small, flickering ember of defiance in a blizzard of fear. That was enough. She closed her eyes, shutting out the sea of faces, and retreated to the only place she felt safe, her memory. The first note escaped as a trembling, almost inaudible whisper. The wind may blow, the rain may fall. It was weak, fragile. Someone in the crowd snickered. Jessica's smirk widened. This was exactly the disaster she had engineered. But then, as she drew another breath, Clara didn't just sing the next line, she lived it. She was 7 again, huddled under the kitchen table, and her mother was singing against the storm. The tremor in her voice didn't vanish, it transformed. It became a rich, soulful vibrato, the sound of a heart that had been broken but had somehow kept beating. The shadows start to creep, but listen for the tune, that's all, a promise you can keep. The voice that filled the room was not the shy, mousy whisper of a janitor. It was a pure, resonant alto, a voice that carried the weight of experience and the light of an unextinguished hope. The snickering stopped abruptly. Across the room, conversations halted. Mr. Davies, the young executive from the coffee spill, looked up from his phone, his mouth slightly agape as he truly saw the woman he'd dismissed that morning for the first time. Jessica's smirk faltered, twisted into confusion, then disbelief. The power in the room had fundamentally shifted, and she was no longer in control of it. In a far corner, Alistair Blackwood had been deep in a conversation about quarterly earnings, annoyed by the karaoke spectacle.
He'd heard the shaky start and had internally scoffed. But then the melody registered, a key turning a lock in a part of his soul he'd sealed off a decade ago. He froze, his glass of whiskey stopping halfway to his lips. He wasn't just hearing a song, he was smelling the lavender scent of his wife Eleanor's pillow. He was feeling the phantom weight of his 6-year-old daughter Lily asleep on his chest. He was hearing Eleanor's soft hum against his ear as she sang that exact lullaby. A single note to guide you all, beneath the lonely moon. It was the line she always whispered to him before he left on long business trips. It was their secret code for, "I'll be your way back home." He turned, and the raw, unfiltered emotion in the voice hit him like a physical wave. He looked at the woman on the stage, but he wasn't seeing a janitor in a cheap dress. He was seeing the ghost of everything he had ever loved and lost. The years of carefully constructed emotional armor didn't just crack, they vaporized. The dam of unshed grief, built over 10 long, hollow years, finally broke. To the utter shock of every person in the room, a single tear tracked down the CEO's cheek, carving a path through his steel facade. The great Alistair Blackwood had completely and publicly lost control. Clara's final note hung in the air, shimmering with a beautiful, heartbreaking vibrato. The silence that followed was not predatory anymore. It was sacred, a shared, collective breath being held by 200 people. She opened her eyes, blinking against the light, bracing for the inevitable laughter. Instead, she saw the room, the stunned faces, and finally, him, the CEO. His face was a canvas of raw, unconcealed pain, and in that moment, she wasn't afraid of him. She felt an impossible, inexplicable connection to the most powerful and most broken man in the room.
For a long, stunned moment, the only sound in the room was the hum of the HVAC system. Then, the band leader, a man who had seen 1,000 half-hearted performances, began to clap. It was a slow, deliberate sound of profound respect. It broke the spell. Another person joined, then another, until the room erupted not in polite corporate applause, but in a raw, roaring, standing ovation. It was a tidal wave of sound, a release of the collective emotion Clara had just uncorked. Standing in the front row, pale and furious, Jessica Thorne remained seated. The applause was a physical assault on her ego. Her attempt at a power play had backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable, elevating her intended victim to a revered icon while leaving her isolated and petty in her chair. Clara barely heard it. The applause felt distant, a roaring in her ears. The sea of faces, now filled with awe and tears, was more terrifying than their mockery had been. She had just ripped open her heart and shown them the contents, and now they were clapping at her pain. It was too much. With the practiced care of her profession, she placed the heavy microphone back on its stand, gave a single, terrified nod that encompassed no one and everyone, and turned. She didn't just leave the stage, she fled. Ignoring the main floor, she beelined for the familiar service doors, a portal back to her world. She pushed through into the stark, fluorescent-lit hallway, the heavy door swinging shut behind her, cutting off the applause. She leaned her back against the cool painted wall, gasping for air, trying to slow the frantic rhythm of her heart. "Wait!" The voice was not a command. It was a raw, hoarse plea, ragged with emotion. It cut through her panic and stopped her cold. Alistair Blackwood stood at the end of the hallway, having followed her out. He had walked away from his own party, brushing past stunned executives, his eyes locked only on her. Up close, the formidable CEO looked completely undone. His billion-dollar suit seemed ill-fitting on a man suddenly so burdened by grief. His eyes were red-rimmed, his composure shattered. Clara flinched, wrapping her arms around herself, convinced the final blow was about to land.
Mr. Blackwood, I am so sorry, she began, the words tumbling out in a rush of panic. I don't know what happened. They made me go up there. I didn't mean to cause a disturbance. I'll clear out my locker tonight. You won't have to fire me. I'll just leave. He held up a hand, a gesture that was both commanding and weary. No, stop. Please, he said, and the word please from him was so unexpected it silenced her immediately. You're not in trouble. He took a hesitant step closer. The song, he said, his voice cracking. Where did you learn that song? The question was so far from what she'd expected that it threw her off balance. It was my mother's, she whispered. It was my mother's. She passed away from cancer 2 years ago. She used to sing it to me whenever I was scared. Alistair flinched as if she'd struck him. He leaned against the wall, mirroring her posture, the vast social chasm between them suddenly gone. My wife, he said, the words heavy with a decade of unshed grief. Her name was Eleanor. She sang that exact song. He looked away, his gaze lost in a painful past. She sang it to our daughter, Lily, the night before we lost her. Lily was so sick, so frightened, and Eleanor sat by her bedside and sang that song all night. It was the last thing my daughter heard. He swallowed hard. A year later, we buried Eleanor. The doctors called it a congenital heart defect. I knew what it was. It was a broken heart. The confession hung in the sterile hallway, a staggering piece of humanity from a man made of myths and numbers. In that moment, the hallway became a sanctuary. They weren't the CEO and the janitor. They were two survivors, two members of a club no one ever asks to join, connected by a shared melody of loss. He finally met her eyes again, and for the first time he truly saw her, the deep well of sadness behind her quiet demeanor that so perfectly mirrored his own. He asked her, his voice soft, as if he'd realized he'd never known. Clara, sir. Clara May. He repeated the name as a discovery. He straightened up, a flicker of his old authority returning, but tempered with this new vulnerability. I have to go back in there, but this conversation is not over. He looked at her, his gaze intense. My office, Monday morning, 9 o'clock, please. Before she could form a reply, he turned and walked back toward the noise of the party, leaving Clara alone in the ringing silence, her entire world tilted on its axis. The weekend was a long, suffocating fog of anxiety. Clara existed in a state of suspended animation, the events of Friday night playing on a continuous, vivid loop in her mind. His raw grief, the impossible coincidence of the song, the startling vulnerability in his eyes, it had all felt so real. But Saturday's daylight brought with it the cold, harsh logic of her world. He was a billionaire CEO who had a momentary emotional lapse. She was the janitor who caused it. The simplest explanation was always the most likely. The Monday meeting was a private, more dignified firing, perhaps with a small severance check to assuage his guilt over the scene his employees had caused. She spent Sunday staring at the menacing pile of red-stamped medical bills on her kitchen table, a stark reminder of the reality she was sure she'd be returning to. The word please he had used echoed in her mind, the one dissonant note in her symphony of dread, but it was not enough to silence her fears.
On Monday morning, she walked through the gleaming front doors of Blackwood Industries not as an invisible ghost, but as a spectacle. She wore the same $7 blue dress, the nicest thing she owned, now a garment of both humiliation and a strange, terrifying triumph. The morning rush of employees parted around her. The whispers were immediate. People she had worked around for years, people who had never seen her face, now stared openly. But the looks weren't mocking. They were a mixture of awe, respect, and intense curiosity. The young executive, Mr. Davies, saw her by the elevators and looked away quickly, a flush of what looked like shame on his face. The elevator ride to the 40th floor was the longest of her life. She watched the numbers climb, feeling like she was ascending to meet her fate. When the doors opened to the executive suite, Mr. Blackwood's assistant, a famously icy woman named Diane, was already on her feet. Her professional composure was visibly rattled. "Miss May," she said, using Clara's last name for the first time in 3 years, "Mr. Blackwood is expecting you. Can I get you a coffee? Water?" The offer was a small earthquake, a shift in the tectonic plates of the company hierarchy. Clara, too nervous to even swallow, politely shook her head. Alistair's office was an intimidating expanse of glass and steel, but the man himself was standing by the window, not behind his fortress of a desk. The sadness in his eyes remained, but it was now tempered by a quiet clarity. "Clara," he began, his voice calm. "First, I want to offer you my sincerest apology for the behavior of my staff. What happened to you was cruel and unacceptable. I assure you it is being dealt with." As if on cue, the intercom on his desk buzzed. "Sir, I have Jessica Thorne from marketing on the line for you," Diane's voice announced. Alistair's face hardened, the ice returning for a brief, targeted moment. He pressed the speaker button. "Alistair, hi!" Jessica's overly cheerful voice filled the room. "Jessica," Alistair's tone was glacial. "Your behavior on Friday night was a disgrace to this company and to basic human decency. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. Do not contact me again." He clicked the speaker off, the sound of Jessica's shocked gasp cut short. He then turned back to Clara, his expression softening again. "As I was saying, that is being dealt with." He walked over to a polished credenza and picked up a simple silver frame. It held the photo of a smiling woman with the kind eyes and a little girl with a gap-toothed grin sitting in a field of wildflowers. "This was my Eleanor and my Lily." He said their names with a gentle reverence, formally introducing Clara to the ghosts who haunted him. He then opened a drawer and pulled out a thick, leather-bound portfolio. Before she passed, my wife had a dream. She was a musician. She wanted to create a foundation to fund music and arts education for underprivileged children, a place where kids who felt invisible could find their voice. He slid the portfolio across the desk. The cover was embossed with gold letters, the Eleanor and Lily Foundation. "I buried this a decade ago. It was too painful," he said softly. "But Friday night, I realized the greatest dishonor to their memory was letting their dream die with them." He looked directly at Clara. "I am launching the foundation. I'm endowing it with $50 million, and I want you to run it." Clara stared, her mind unable to process the words. "Me? Sir, I have no experience, no degree." "Clara," he interrupted gently, "for 10 years, I've hired people with degrees from Wharton and Harvard. They know how to build a spreadsheet, but they don't know how to build a community. You stood on the stage terrified, and you told the truth with the song. That is more qualification than I can find on any resume. I need a heart for this foundation, not just a brain." He named a salary that was so large it seemed like a made-up number, a figure that would vaporize her debt and rewrite her future. "The foundation needs a director, a leader. Will you accept?" Tears filled Clara's eyes. She looked from the portfolio bearing the names of her wife and daughter, to the smiling photo, to the hopeful, searching eyes of the man offering her a new life. "My mother," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "she always said the music wasn't mine to keep. It was just passing through me for whoever needed to hear it." She met his gaze. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood, for Eleanor and Lily, I'll do it." 1 year later, Clara stood on a different kind of stage. The room was not a cold, glass-walled boardroom, but the warm, velvet-draped interior of the city's oldest theater, restored to its former glory. It was the first annual showcase for the Eleanor and Lily Foundation, and the air buzzed not with the tension of corporate networking, but with the excited chatter of children, proud parents, and genuine patrons of the arts. Clara, standing confidently at the podium, was no longer in a $7 dress that screamed invisibility. She wore an elegant, deep blue gown that shimmered under the warm lights, a color that she had chosen not to hide in, but to shine in. "A voice is a powerful thing," she began, her own voice steady and clear, carrying easily to the back of the packed theater without a hint of a tremble. "I once met a young boy who came to us so shy he would barely speak a word. He spent his days drawing in a tattered notebook, creating entire worlds no one else could see. We gave him a canvas and some paints, and today his art hangs in the city gallery. He didn't need us to give him a voice. He just needed a safe place to use it." She looked out into the audience, and her eyes found Alistair Blackwood in the front row. The formidable CEO was gone, replaced by a man who smiled easily and often. The deep lines of grief on his face had softened, replaced by a warmth that seemed to radiate from within. He was no longer a man haunted by ghosts. He was a man honoring a legacy. As Clara spoke, he wasn't looking at her as a successful investment, but as a cherished partner, a friend. He gave her a small, proud nod.
"The mission of this foundation," Clara continued, her voice full of passion, "is to find those quiet places and make them sing, to ensure that no child feels like their story, their song, their art is something to be hidden away." She smiled. "And now, to perform the song that, for me, started it all, please welcome our first ever vocal scholarship recipient, the wonderful Maria." A small 10-year-old girl with wide, nervous eyes walked onto the stage. Backstage, just moments before, Clara had knelt down in front of her. "They look scary," Maria had whispered, staring at the huge audience. Clara had gently taken her hand. "It's okay to be scared," she'd said. "Just close your eyes, think of someone you love with your whole heart, and sing just for them. The song will do the rest." Maria took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and began to sing. And the melody that filled the theater was the same hauntingly beautiful folk song. But tonight, it wasn't a song of loss or a lament of a broken heart. Sung in the clear, hopeful voice of a child taking her first brave step into the light, it had become an anthem of rebirth, of a legacy being passed on to a new generation. As the final sweet notes filled the theater, Clara watched from the wings. Alistair caught her eye from the audience, and they shared a look. It was a look that transcended words, a shared understanding of the beautiful, powerful thing they had built from the ashes of their shared sorrow. They had taken their private grief and turned it into public grace. A voice that was once a secret whisper in an empty room now echoed in the hearts of hundreds, proving that the greatest treasures are often hidden in the quietest souls, waiting only for the courage and the kindness to be heard. What did you think of Clara's incredible journey? Let us know your favorite part in the comments below.